A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guzit, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party that has not been decried as a communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not been held back, branding the approach of communism against the more advanced position parties, as well as the reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. 2. It's a high time It's a high time that communism should openly, in the face of the world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet the nursery tale of the spectre of communism with manifesto of party itself. To this end, communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto to be published in English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. 1. Bourgeois and proletarian. The history of hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In word, oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition to another one. Carried uninterpreted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either revolutionary reconstruction of society at large or common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome, we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, a subordinate gradation. The modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with antagonisms. It has but established new class, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinct feature is simplified class antagonism. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chattered burghers of the early towns. From these burgesses, the first element of bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up a fresh ground for the rising of bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with colonies, the increase in meanings of exchange, and in commodities generally gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, to impulse, never to be known, and thereby to revolutionary element the tolerating of feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, in which the industrial production was monopolized by closing guilds. Now, no longer sufficed of the growing wants new market of manufacturing. The manufacturing system took its place. The guild masters were pushed on one side by the manufacturer bourgeoisie. Divisions of labor between different corporate guards vanished in the face of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer suffocated. Thereupon, steam and machinery revolutionized industrial productions. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant modern industry, the place of industrial bourgeois by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeois. The modern industry has established the world market, for which the discovery of America paved the way in. This market was given immense development to commerce, navigation, communication by land. This development has in its turn reacted on the extension of industry and the proportion of industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended. In the same portion of bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see, therefore, how the modern bourgeoisie is itself a product of a long course of development, of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie is accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class. An oppressed class under sway of feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune, here in a dependent urban republic. As Italy and Germany, there are taxable third estates of monarchy, as in France. Afterwards, in the period of manufacturing proper, serving either semi-feudal or absolute monarchy, is a counterpoise against nobility, and in fact a cornerstone of great monarchies in general. The bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry, world market, conquered for itself in a modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of a modern state is a community for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically has played the most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever has got up the hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It is pitiless, torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound the man to his natural superiors. That has left him remaining no more other cash, no other nexus between man and man that is naked self-interest. The callous cash payment, it has drowned most heavily assisted of the religious favor, of the chivalrous enthusiasm, of the philosophic sentimentalism, in the icy water of eco-testalic. The numberless indefensible chartered freedoms. It has set up a single unconscionable freedom, free trade, in one word, for explosive veiled by religious or political illusions that has substituted naked, shameless, and direct brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped off its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up with reverence. The bourgeoisie has stripped off its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to the reverence are. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into its paid wages laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away the family of its sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionaries so much admire, found in its fitting complement in the slothful idealism. It has been first shown what man activities can bring about its accomplished wonders, far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that has put shade for all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production. Thereby, the relations of production and them, the whole relations of society, conservation of the old models of production in unaltered form, was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for earlier industrial social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguishing the bourgeoisie epoch. Everlasting uncertainty of agitation distinguish of bourgeois epoch from earlier ones, all fixed, fast frozen relations, with their train of accident and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new formed ones become acquainted before they can ossify. All the solid melts into the air, all that is holy, all the holies are profaned, and man is at least compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with kind. The need of constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of market, given away cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great charging of reactionists, it has the Communist Manifesto drawn from under feet of industry, the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed, dislodged by new industries, whose introduction became life and death questions for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from remote zones, industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but every quarter of the globe. It is a place of old wants, satisfied by the production of the country. We find new wants requiring the satisfaction, the products of distant lands, and climate, in place of old local national speculation and self-sufficiency. We have intercourse with every direction, universal interdependence of nations and as in materials. So in intellectual productions, the intellectual actual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness of narrow-mindedness becomes property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures there has arisen as world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by its insanely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even most barbarian, nations into civilization. The cheap prices of commodities are heavily artillery, with which batters down Chinese walls, with which forces the barbarians, intensely obstinate hatred of foreigners to capitulate. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it called civilization into their midst, to become bourgeois themselves. In one word, it creates the world after its own image. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to rule of the towns. It has created enormous cities, has greatly increased the urban population as compared with the rural, and it rescued as considerable parts of the population from idiocy of rural life. Just as it has made the country dependent on the towns, so it has made barbarian and semi-barbarian countries depend on the civilized one. Nations of peasants on nations of bourgeois in the east of the west. The bourgeoisie keeps more and more doing away with the scattered state of population, of the means of production and property. It has agglomerated population, centralized the means of production, and has concentrated properly in a few hands. The necessary consequence of his political centralization, independent or loosely connected provisions with separate interests, laws, government, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation with one government. The necessary consequence of this political centralization, independent or but loosely connected provinces with separate interests, law, government, and systems of taxation became lumped together into one nation with one government, one code of laws, one national class interest, one frontier, and one customer tariff. But the bourgeoisie, during its role of scare 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have preceding generations together. Subjections of nature forces to man, machinery application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing the whole continent continent of for civilized cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole populations conjured out of the ground. What earlier century had even presentment of productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? We see then the means of production and of exchange on those whose foundation of the bourgeoisie built itself up, who were generated by feudal society and at certain stage in development of these means of production and exchange. The conditions under which feudal society produced and exchanged the feudal organization of agriculture and manufacturing industry. In one word, the feudal productive forces, they became so fetters that they had to burst asunder. They were burst asunder. Into their place stepped the free competition, accompanied by social and political constitution adapted in it, and the economic and political sway of bourgeois class. A similar movement is going on before our own eyes. Modern bourgeois societies with relations of production for exchange of property, a society that has conjured with such gigantic means of production and of exchange. It is like a whole sorcerer who has no longer able control of power of neither world whom he has called up by his spells. For many a decade past, the history of industry and commerce, but the history of revolt and model productive forces against the modern conditions of production, against the property and relations that are conditions for the existence of bourgeois and the role of its rule. It's enough to mention the commercial crisis that by their periodical return by the existence of the entire bourgeois society on its trail. Each time, more threateningly, it's in these crises a great part not only the existing products but also the previous created productive forces are periodically destroyed in these crises. There are breakout an epidemic that in earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. Society suddenly finds itself put back to a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as a famine. A universal wall of devastation had cut off the supply every means. Of substance, industry, and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of substance, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces or disposal of society no longer tend to further develop the conditions of bourgeois properties. The contrary, they have become so powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon they become these fetters. They bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to compromise the wealth created by them. And how the bourgeois gets over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced by destruction of a mass productive forces, by the conquest of new market, and by more the exploitation of old ones. That is to say, by the paving the way for more the extensive and for more destructive crises, and the diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only the bourgeoisie is forged weapons that brings death to itself. It has also called to existence the men who wield those weapons. The modern working class, the proletarians. In proportion as the bourgeoisie, that is, capital, is developed, in the same proportion is a proletariat. The modern working class developed a class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labours increase capital. These labourers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all vicious attitudes of competition, to all fluctuation of the market. Only extensive use of machinery, the division of labour, the work of the proletarians, has lost all individual character, and consequently all charm of workman. He became appendage of the machine, and he only most simple, most monotonous, the most easily acquired knack that is required of him. Hence, the cost of production of a workman is restricted almost entirely. The means of substance that he requires of maintenance, and for the propagation of his race. But the price of commodity, and therefore also of labour, is equally to its cost of production. In proportion, therefore, as the repulsiveness of the work increases, the wage decreases. Nay, more, in proportion there is use of machinery and division of labour increasing. In the same proportion, the burden of toil also increases, whether by prolongation of the working hours, by increased work exact in time given by, or increased speed of machinery, etc. Modern industry has converted the little workshop of partial master into the great factory of industrial capitalists. Masses of labourers crowded into the factory are organized like soldiers, As privates of the industrial army, they are placed under the command and perfect hierarchy of officers, and sergeants are placed under command of perfect hierarchy of officers and servants. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class and of the bourgeois state, they are daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, by the overlooker, and above all, by individual bourgeois manufacturer himself. The more openly his despotism proclaims gain to be the end of the and aim, the more petty, the more hateful, and the more embittering it is. The less the skill, the extension, and the strength involved in manual labor. In other words, there are more in modern industry becomes developed, the more it is labor of men suspend that labor, that woman, differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity of the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to us, use, according to their age and sex. No sooner there is an exploitation of labor by the manufacturer, so far at an end that he receives his wages in cash, that he has set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie, the landlord, the shopkeeper, the pawnbroker, etc. The lower strata of the bourgeoisie, the small tradespeople, shopkeepers, and retired tradesmen, generally the handcraftsmen and peasants, all these sink gradually into the proletariat, partly because the diminutive capital does not suffice for the scale of which modern industry is carried on, and is swamped in the competition with large capitalists, partly because their specialized skill is rendered worthless by new methods of production. Thus, proletariat is recruited from the class of population. The proletariat goes through various stages of development. With its birth begins is the struggle with the bourgeoisie. At first, the contest is carried on by individual laborers, then by the work people or a factory, then the operative of one trade in the locality against the individual bourgeoisie who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks not against the bourgeois conditions of production, but against the instruments of production themselves. They destroy the important ways of compete with labor. They smash the machinery. They smash to pieces machinery. They set factories ablaze. They seek to restore the force of vanished status of the workman of the Middle Ages. By this stage, the laborers still form an incoherent mass scattered over the whole country and broken up by the mutual competition. If anywhere where they were unite to form more compact bodies, This is not yet consequence of their own active union, but the union of bourgeoisies, which class in order of the attain into its political ends. It is compelled to set a whole proletariat in motion, and moreover yet, for a time, able to do so. At this stage, therefore, the proletarians do not remain fight for their enemies, but their enemies of their enemies. The remnants of absolute monarchy. The landowners, the non-official industrial bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeoisie. Thus, the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Every victory is so obtained is a victory for the bourgeoisie. But the development of industry, the proletariat of not only increases in the number, it becomes concentrated in a greater masses. Its strength grows, and it feels that the strength more. The various interests and conditions of life within the ranks of proletariats are more and more equalized. In proportion as ranks of the proletariat, in the proportion as machinery obliterates all distinctions of labor, and nearly going everywhere reduced wages to the same low level. The growing competition amongst the bourgeoisie and resulting commercial crisis, and the wages of workers ever more fluctuating. The increasing improvement of machinery, ever more rapidly developing, makes their livelihood more precious. The collisions between individual workmen and individual bourgeois take more and more the combination trade union against the bourgeois. They club in order to keep the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provision beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. Now and then, the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battles lies not in the immediate result, but in ever-expanding union of the workers. This union is held by the improved means of communication that is created by modern industry, and has placed workers of different localities in contact with one another. It was just this contact that was needed to centralize the numerous local struggles, all of the same character, into national struggle between classes. But every class struggle is a political struggle, and that union, to attain which the burghers of the Middle Ages, with their miserable highways, required centuries. The modern proletarian, thanks to railways achieved in a few years. This organization of proletarians into a class, and consequently into political party, and is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves. But it ever rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. It compels legitimate recognition of particular interests of the workers by taking advantage of division among bourgeoisie itself. Thus 10-hour bill in England was carried. Altogether, collisions between the classes of old society further in many ways the course of development was proletariat. The bourgeoisie found itself involved in a constant battle. It at first with aristocracy, later on with those portions of the bourgeoisie itself, those whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry. At all times with the bourgeoisie of a foreign country in these battles, it seems itself to be compelled to appeal the proletariat, to ask help, and thus to be dragged into the political arena. The bourgeoisie itself, therefore, supplies and proletates its own elements of political and general education. In other words, it furnishes the proletariat with weapons with fighting the bourgeoisie. Further, as we have already seen, entire sections of ruling class are, by the advance of industry, precipitated into proletariat, or at least threatened in their conditions of existence. These also supply the proletariat with fresh elements of enlightenment and progress. Finally, in times when the class struggles near the decisive hour, the progress of dissolution going on the ruling class, in fact with a whole range of old society, assumes such a violent, glaring character that a small section of ruling class cuts itself adrift and joins the revolutionary class. The class that holds the future in its hands. Just as therefore, on an earlier period, a section of the nobility went over the bourgeoisie, so now a portion of the bourgeoisie ideologists who have raised themselves to the level of comprehending theoretically the historical movement as a whole. All of the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of the modern industry. The proletariat is a special and essential project. The lower bourgeoisie, that is the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, and the fight against the bourgeoisie. To say the extinction their extinct is fractions of the bourgeoisie. They are therefore revolutionary, but conservative. Nay more. They are reactionary, for they try to roll back so their wheel of history. If by chance they are revolutionary, they are only in view of impeding the transfer of the proletariat that is thus to defend the present. But their future interests, their own standpoint to place themselves at the proletariat. The dangerous class, lumpenproletariat, the social scum that is possibly rotting mass thrown off the lowest layers of old society, may here and there be swept in movement by a proletarian revolution. Its conditions of hard life, however, prepare it far more for the part of bribe tool of reactionary intrigue. In the condition of proletariat, those of society at large are already virtually swamped. The proletarian without property, his relation to his wife and children had no longer anything in common with the bourgeoisie family relations. Modern industry, labor, modern subject to capital, with the same in England as in France, in America as in Germany, has stripped him every trace of national character. Law, mortality, religion are so to him so many bourgeoisie produce, behind which lurk and ambush the bourgeoisie interest. All preceding classes that got an upper hand are sought for 50 already acquired status by subjecting society at the large to their conditions of oppression. The proletarians cannot become masters with productive forces of society, except by abolishing their own previous mode of appropriation, and thereby also every other previous mode of appropriation. They have nothing in their own to secure and to forfeit. Their mission is to destroy all previous securities and insurances of the individual property. All previous historical movements were movements of the minorities, or in the interest of minorities. The proletarian movement is self-consciousness. The independent movement immense majority in the interest of immense majority. The proletariat, the lowest stratum of our present society, cannot raise itself up without a whole superincumbent strata of official societies being sprung into the air. Through not in substance, yet in form, the struggle of proletariat with bourgeoisie is a first national struggle. The proletariat of each country must, of course, first all settle their matters with its own bourgeoisie. In depicting the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we trace the more revealed civil war raging within existing society, up to the point where the war breaks out and opens the open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation in the sway of proletariat. Hitherto, every form of society has been based, as we have already seen, on the antagonism of oppressing the oppressed class. But in order to oppress a class, certain conditions must be assured to it under which it can at least continue its slavish existence. The serf-in period of the Communist Manifesto 7. Serfdom raised himself to be a member of the commune, just as the petty bourgeois, under the yoke of the feudal absolutism, managed to develop into the bourgeois, the modern labor of the country, instead of raising with the process of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence on his own class. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. And it here becomes evident that as bourgeoisie is any longer ruling class in a society, to impose the condition of existence upon the society of overriding law. Its unit rule because it's incompetent to assure the instincts into slave within his slavery, because it cannot help him let him sink in such a state that has fed him instead of being fed by him. Society can no longer live under the bourgeoisie. In the other words, its instance is no longer compatible with society. The essential conditions existence of the swale of bourgeois class in its formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on the competition between the laborers and the advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is it the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers. Due to competition by the revolutionary combination, due to association, the development of modern industry therefore cuts from under its feet to the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces the appropriate products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces, above all, are its own gravediggers. It falls and victory of the proletariat are equally inventable. 2. Proletarians and communists. In what relations do communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to the other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletarians. As a whole, they do not set up sectarian principles of their own, by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only: 1. In the national struggles proletarians of the different countries, they point out to bring common interest to the entire proletariat, independently of the nationality. 2. In various stages of the development, which the struggles of working class against bourgeoisie movements as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have other great mass of proletariat advantage, clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions of the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of communists is the same as the other proletarian parties. Formation of the proletariat into a class. Overthrow the bourgeois supremacy. Conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communities are in no way based on ideas or principles that have not been invented or discovered by this would-be universal reformer. The merely express in general terms, actually relations springing from an existing class struggle, from historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past are continually being subject to historical change consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But the modern bourgeois private property is final most complete expression of the system of producing and approaching products that is based on class antagonism, on the exploitation of many by the few. In the sense of the communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with desire and abolishing the right of personally acquired property as the fruit of man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of pretty artisan, of the small peasant, of a form of property that precedes of the bourgeois form? Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of pretty artisan and of the small peasant? A form of property that preceded the bourgeois form. The bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying daily. Or do you mean the merchant bourgeois' private property? Does this wage labor created any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, that is, that kind of property which exploits the wage laborer, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property, it in present form, is a base of antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be capitalist, it is to have not only purely personal, but a social status in production. Capital is collective product, and only the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of the society can be set in motion. Capital is therefore not only personal, is a social power. Therefore, a capital is converted to common property and into property of all members of society. The personal property is thereby transformed into social property. It is only social character that is property that is changed, is to lose its class character. Now, let us now take wage labor. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, that that quantum of means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence is the laborer. Merely suffices to prolong and reduce a bare existence. We by no more means intend to abolish the personal appropriation of the products of labor and the oppression that is made by the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith command the labor and of others. All that we want to do away with the miserable character of the oppression under which laborer lives merely to increase capital and is allowed to live only so far that the interest of ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, the living laborer is but means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is it but a means to widen, to enrich, promote the existence of the laborer. In the bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, the capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolition of the state of things called by the bourgeois, abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of the bourgeoisie individuality. The bourgeoisie independent. The bourgeoisie's freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying and all other braid words of our bourgeois about freedom in general have a meaning, if any only contrast with restriction selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production and bourgeois itself. You are horrified at your intending to what away with your private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of population. Its existence for few is solely due its non-existence in hands of the 9/10. You reapproach us. Therefore, with intending to away with form property, the necessary condition of those existing is the non-existing and property of the immense or majority of society. The Communist Manifesto. In one word, you reapproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so. That is just what we intend. From the moment the labor can no longer be converted into the capital money or rent, into social power capable of monopolized. From the moment to rent into social power capable of being monopolized. That is, from the moment when individual property cannot be transformed into bourgeois property, into capital. From that movement, you say individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, that the middle class owner and property that must not indeed be swept away and made impossible. Communism deprives no man of power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of power of subjugate the labor of others by means of appropriations. It has been objected that upon abolition of private property, all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. The whole of its objection, but it's another expression of tautology, that there is no longer any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and approaching material products have the same way been urged against the communistic mode, producing and approaching intellectual products, just as to the bourgeois. The disappearance of class property is disappearance of production itself. So the disappearance of class culture to him identical disappearance of the culture. That culture, the loss of he laments, is for enormous majority a mere training is to act as a machine. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to our intent abolition of bourgeois property, the standard of bourgeois nations of freedom, culture, law, and sea. Your very ideas, but outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production, and the bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will your class made the law economical conditions of existence of a class. Selfish misconception that will induce you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason the social forms of springing from your present mode of production and from form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in class that precede to you. What you clearly see is the case of an ancient property which admit the case of feudal property, which your course of forbidden to admit the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Abolition, Offenburg, to the family. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal at the communists. Only on what foundation will this present family? The bourgeois family, based on capital, on private gain, in its incomplete developed form. This family exists only amongst the bourgeoisie. But this state of things find its complement in practical absence of the family among the proletarians and the public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its competence vanishes, and both will vanish with vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop with exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime we plead guilty, but you say we destroy the most hallowed of relation when we replace home and education by social. And our education, it is not this only social and determined by these social conditions under which you educate by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society, by means of schools. And see, the communists have not invented the intervention of society in school. They do but seek an alter of character, the character of that intervention, and to rescue education from influence and ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parents and children, becomes almost disgusting the more by the action of modern industry. All the family ties amongst the proletarians are torn asunder, and the children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But the communists should introduce community of women, screams the bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeoisie sees his wife in a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion that a lot being to all likewise fall to the woman. He has not even suspicion the real point of aim, that is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeoisie and community of women which they pretend to it is openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce the community of women that has not existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not to speak of common prostitutes, take the great pleasure of stealing each other's wives. Bourgeois marriages. In reality, a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they decided to introduce, in substitution for hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that abolition of present system of production must bring with its abolition of community of women springing in the system, that is, of prostitution, both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring and abolish countries with nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first all acquire the political supremacy, must rise to be the leading class of nation, must constitute itself the nation it is so far, itself national. Though it's not bourgeois sense of the world. National differences and antagonism between people are daily more and more vanishing, owing development of the bourgeoisie. Freedom of commerce and the world market is to uniformity in the mode of production and the conditions of corresponding theatre. The supremacy of proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for emancipation of proletariat. In proportion, the exploitation of individual by another will also be put an end to. The exploitation is of one nation by another will also be put an end to. In hostility of nations to another will come to an end. The charges against communism made from a religious, the philosophical, and generally from ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptation, in one word, man's consciousness changes with every change in conditions of his material extent of his social relations and social life. What else does the history ideas prove than an intellectual production changes its character in proportion as the material production is changed? The ruling ideas of each age have been given the ideas of its ruling class. When people speak of the ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact within the old society the elements of the new one have been created, that this dissolution of old ideas keeps even pace with dissolution and old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas scabbled in the 18th century, revolutionary to rationalize ideas, feudal society fought its death battle with the conscience of merely gave expression of the sway of free competition within dominate of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, in religious, moral, philosophical, and juridical ideas, in modified the last of the religion. But religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived this change. The Communist Manifesto 11. There are besides eternal truths such as freedom, justice, etc., that are common to all states of society, but communism abolishes the eternal truth. It abolishes the region and all mortality instead of constituting them on a new basis. There are therefore acts of contradiction to and past of historical experience. What does this accusation reduce itself to? The history of past society has consisted with the development of class antagonisms that assumed everyone forms different epochs. But whatever form they may have taken, one fact is common to all past ages, viz. The exploitation of part of society by the other. No wonder then that the social concussions the cautiousness of past ages. Despite all multiplicity and variety it displays, moves with certain common forms or general ideas which cannot completely vanish except with total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture in the traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involved the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. But let us have done bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above the first step of revolution by the working classes raised by the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle, to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use political supremacy to wrest, by degree, all capital from the bourgeoisie to centralize all instruments of production in hands of the state, that is, of proletariat organized as ruling class, and to increase the total productive force as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except the means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and the conditions of bourgeois production by the means of measures, therefore, which appear economically is sufficient and untenably, but which in the course of the movement will outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon all social order. All are avoidable as a means revolutioning the modes of production. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty general applicable. 1. Abolition of property in land and application of all rent of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progress or graduated income tax. 3. Abolition of all rights inheritance. 4. Confiscation of the property of the immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in hands of the state by means of national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization means communization communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extensions of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing of cultivation of wastelands and improvement in the soil, generally in accordance with common plan. 8. Equal liability of all to work. Establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture. 9. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries. Gradual abolition of all distinction between town and country by by a more equal distribution of the populace over the country. 10. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor in its present form. Combination of education with industrial production. And C. When in course of development, class distinctions have been disappeared, and all production have been concentrated in the hands of vast association of the whole nation, the public power will lose political character. Political power, properly so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If proletariat during its contest with bourgeois is compelled by the force of circumstance to organize itself as a class. If, by means of revolution, it makes itself the ruling class, and as such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for existence of class antagonism and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy as a class. In place of old bourgeois society, with its classes and class antagonisms, we should have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for free development of all. 3. Socialist and communist literature. 1. Reactionary socialism. A. Feudal socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois societies. In the French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocrates again succumbed to the hateful upstarts. Thenceforth, a serious political struggle was altogether out of the question. A literature battle alone remained possible, but even in the domain of literature, in the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obliged to lose sight, apparently, of its own interests, and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie. In the interest of exploit the working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons on their new masters and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way arose feudal socialism. Half lamentation, half lampoon, half an echo of the past, half menace of the future. At the times it by its bitter, witty, incisive criticism, striking, bourgeois to the very heart core, but the ludicrous in its effect through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian arms bag in front of a banner. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted with loud, irreverent laughter. One section of French legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forgot that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different, that are now antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forgot that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism, for that their chief accusation against the bourgeois amounts to this: that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with it not so much that it creates a proletariat as it creates revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join a corrective measures against the working class, and in ordinary life, despite their high flaunting flails, they stoop to pick up golden apples dropped from a tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot, sugar, and potato spirits. As the parsons has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. No, nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism as a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? has not preached the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church, Christian socialism, but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart's burning of the aristocrat. B. Petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not only the class whose conditions were extinct, pined by perished in atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and small peasant proprietors were precursors of the Communist Manifesto 13. Modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but very little developed, industrially and commercially, these two classes are still vegetate side by side with rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie. And ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of the bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly held down by the proletariat by action or competition. And as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching they will be completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufactures, agriculture, and commerce by overlooked baffles and shopmen. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half of the population, it was natural that writers who sided with proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standard of the peasants and petty bourgeois, and from the standpoint of these intermediate classes, should take up the the cudgels of working class. Thus arose from the petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of the school, not only in France but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. It lay bare in hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrollability the disastrous effects of machinery and the division of labor, the concentration of capitals and land of few hands, overproduction and crisis. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasants, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, the dissolution of old moral bonds, of old family relations, of old nationalities. In the positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and exchange with them of the old property relations and the old society, or cramping the modern means of production and exchange within framework of property relations that have been and they were bound to be exploded by those means. In either case, it's both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilds for manufacture, partial relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when stubborn historical facts have dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, this form of socialism ended in a miserable hangover. C. German or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under pressure of the bourgeoisie in power, that was expressions of struggles against this power, was introduced into Germany at the time when the bourgeoisie in the country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers would be philosophers and sprites eagerly seized on their literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, with French literature lost all its immediate practical significance. and assumed it purely literally aspect. Thus, to German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than demands of practical reason, in general, and utterance of will. The revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified. In their eyes, the laws of pure will, of will as it's bound to be, of true human will generally. The work of German literature concentrated solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical consciousness, or rather in annex the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexion took place in the same way which foreign language is operated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literature reversed this process, and with a profane French literature. They wrote philosophical nonsense beneath French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of French historical criticism, they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated, and since it seized the hands of German to express the struggle of one class with another, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of responding not true requirements, but the requirements of truth, not the interests of proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, who has no reality, who exists only with a misty realm of philosophical fantasy. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stocking trade in such a mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight for the Germans, and especially for the Prussian bourgeoisie, against the feudal aristocracy and mostly monarchy. In other words, the liberal movement became more earnest. By this, the long-wished opportunity was offered to true socialism of the confronting the political movement with socialist demands of hurling the traditional anthems against liberalism, against representative governments of bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, and the preaching of the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by his bourgeois movement. German socialism forgot in the nick of time. The French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the extent of modern bourgeois society with its corresponding economic conditions of existence, and the political constitution adapted thereto. The very things of animate was the object of pending the struggle in Germany. To the absolute governments with their following of parsons, professors, country squares, and officials, it served as a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeoisie. It was sweet finish after the bitter pills of flogging and bullets with which these same governments just that. While it is true socialism does serve the government as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it, at the same time, directly represented the reactionary interest, the interest of German Philistines in Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 16th century, and since then constantly cropping up again under the various forms that is real social basis of the existing state of things. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction. On the one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the other, from the rise of the revolutionary proletariat. True, socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The robe of speculative cobwebs, embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment. This transcendental robe in which German socialists wrap their story, eternal truths, all skin and bone, serve to wonderfully increase sale goods amongst such a public. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling the bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. It proclaimed the German nation to be a model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be a typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man, it gave a hidden higher socialistic interpretation, socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character. It went to extreme lengths, directly opposing the brutal, destructive tendency of communism, and the approaching proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt of class struggles. With few expectations, all so-called socialist and communist publications that now, 1874, circulate in Germany belong to a domain of foul and enervating literature. 2. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. 2. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. A part of bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievance in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. To this section belongs the economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of working class, organizers of charity, members of social societies for prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole and corner reforms for every imaginable kid. This form of socialism has moreover been worked into complete system. We may citer Proudhon's philosophes de la misère as an example of this form. The socialistic bourgeois want all advantage over modern social conditions without struggles and danger necessarily resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for the bourgeoisie without a proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best, and bourgeois complete systems in requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system, thereby to march straight away into social New Jerusalem. But it requires in reality that proletariat should remain within bounds of existing society, but should cast away all its hateful ideals concerning the bourgeoisie. A second and more practical but less systematic form of this socialism sought to deprecate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of working class by conditions of existence. In economical relations could be of any advantage to them, but changes of the material conditions of existence. This form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeois relations of the productions and an abolition that is affected only by revolution, but administrative reforms based on the continuing extent of the relations. Reforms, therefore, in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but the best lessen the cost and simplify the administrative work of the bourgeois government. Bourgeois socialism attains a correct expression when and only when it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of working class, protective duties for the benefit of the working class, prison reform the benefit of the working class. This is the last word. And the only seriously meant word of the bourgeois socialism. It is summed up in the phrase of bourgeois. Is a bourgeois the benefit of the working class? 3. Critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to literature which, in every great modern revolution, has always given the voice of demands of proletariat, such as writings of Babeuf and others. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own end, made in time of universal excitement, when feudal society was being overthrown, necessarily failed, owing to the undeveloped state of proletariat, as well as to absence the economic conditions for its emancipation, conditions that are not yet to be produced and could be produced by impending bourgeois epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first movements of proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism and social leveling in crudest form. Socialism, the socialist and communist systems, probably so called, those of Saint Simon Fourier, Owen and others, spring into existence in the early undeveloped period. Described above, struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. The founders of these systems see indeed the class of antagonism as well as the action of decomposing elements in prevailing form of society, but the proletariat as yet its infancy. Others to them speculate of the class without any historical initiative or any independent political movement. Since the development of class, antagonism keeps an even pace with the development of industry. The economic situation, as they find it, does not as yet offer them the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore see search after a new social science. After a new social law, they too create these conditions. Historical action is to yield their personal inventive action. Historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones, and gradual spontaneous class or organization of the proletariat to an organization of society, especially contrived by these inventors. Future history resolves itself, in their eyes, into the propaganda and practical carrying out their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class, as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view they have being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of class struggle, as well as their own surrounding causes, socialists and of these kind of consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the condition of every member of society, even that the most favored. Hence, the habitually appeal the society at large, without distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see in the best possible plan for the best state of society? Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, necessarily doomed to failure, and by the forces of example, to pave the way for the new social gospel. Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at time when the proletariat is still in very undeveloped state and has but a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearns with the general class for a general reconstruction of society. But these socialist and communist publications contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are most valuable They are full of most valuable materials for the enlightenment of working class. The practical measures proposed in them, such as the abolition of distinction between town and country, of family, of the carrying of industries of the count of private individuals, and the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversation of function of the function of the state into a more superintendence of production. All these proposals point solely to the disappearance of class antagonism, which were at the time only just cropping up, and which in these publications are recognized in their earliest indistinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development in proportion as the modern class struggle develops and takes in definite shape. This fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it lose all the practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, although the originators of this system were, in many respects, revolutionary, the disciples have, in every case, formed mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original views of their matters, in opposition to progress, the historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavor and constantly to deaden the class struggle and reconcile the class antagonism. They still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding isolated phalastates, of establishing home colonies, or setting up little Icaria. To decimo editions of New Jerusalem and to realize all these castles in the air. They are compelled to appeal the feelings and purses of the bourgeois. By degree, they sink into the category of reactionary or conservative scuttle depicted above. Differing from all only by more semistic pedantry and by the fanatical and superstitious belief in miracle effects on the social science. They, therefore, violently oppose all the political action on part of the working class, such action, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierists in France respectively oppose the Chartists and the Reformists. 4. Position and communists in relation to various existing opposition parties. Section 2 has made clear relations of the communists to the existing working class parties, such as the Chartists in England and the agrarian reformers in America. The Communist Manifesto 17. The Communists fight for attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of monumentary interests of the working class. But in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. And in France, the communists ally with social democrats against the conservative and radical bourgeoisie, reserving, however, the right to take up critical positions in regard to phases and delusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. In Switzerland, they support the radicals without losing sight of the fact that this party consists of antagonistic elements, partly of democratic socialists, in French sense, partly of radical bourgeois. In Poland, they support the party that insists on the agrarian revolution as the prime condition for national emancipation. That party which formed the insurrection in Cairo in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeoisie whenever it acts in a revolutionary way against the absolute monarchy, the feudal hierarchy, and the petty bourgeoisie, but they never ceased for a single instant to instill into working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between bourgeoisie and proletariat, in order that the German workers may straightway use as so many weapons against the bourgeoisie the social and the political conditions that the bourgeoisie must necessarily introduce along with its supremacy in order that after the fall of reactionary classes in Germany, they fight against the bourgeoisie itself may immediately begin. The communists turned their attention chiefly to Germany because that country is an eve to bourgeois revolution. That is the bond to be carried out under more advanced conditions of Europe civilization and with much more developed proletariat than that of England was the 17th and France in 18th century, and because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all these moments, they bring to the front as leading questions in each. The property question, no matter what its degree of development at time, finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties of countries. The communists disdain to conceal their views, their aims. They openly declare the ends to be attained to forcibly overthrow these extinguishing social conditions. Let this ruling classes tremble at the communists' stake revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose their chains, but they lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite!